Okay, should we go ahead and get started, and maybe a few more people will join us, but we have a lot of stuff we want to share with you today. So I'm gonna go ahead and dig in and invite you all to use the chat or other ways if you have questions as we go along. But first, welcome and thank you for joining us. The end of the day, I hope you guys have had a great day at the EEAO virtual conference. New way for all of us to interact and learn new things. So given we have a little less than an hour and we have a lot of stuff that we are excited to introduce to you all and share, I want to dive right in. I'm Nancy Bales. I'm Executive Director at Gray Family Foundation, and I'm joined by my partner at Gray Family Foundation, Nell Tessman, our program officer. Hopefully many of you know her. And I'm really thrilled also to have Anupama Joshi join us. Anupama is the executive director of the Blue Sky Funders Forum. And Gray Family Foundation is part of Blue Sky Funders. And the Blue Sky Funders is a group of national funders, a collective from around the country that we're really focused on a shared value around the importance of connecting people in the outdoors. So we have, as well as the funders from across the country that are part of this, we work really closely with a lot of practitioners and partners in the field, and one of those is definitely the NAAAE, who participates and shares their knowledge and information with us. And that connects very well to this Rethink Outside. We partnered with the practitioners and others over many, many months to develop Rethink Outside, which is a call to action to all of us who believe that everyone deserves that opportunity to enjoy time in the outdoors. So today, our goal is to introduce you to that Rethink Outside framework and the tools and the messaging brief that have been created in this partnership. And that's available from all to use, that hopefully will help you to strengthen the story that you're telling about your work. So I want to start with just a little bit of background about this. I mean, we came to this with this knowledge that the current narrative, while it's compelling to all of us because we know that it's important to have time outside, it's hard to get it to have that sense of urgency that we know exists around spending time outside, that it's more than just a nice to have. And so we spend time really thinking about how do you change this narrative, thinking about getting help, discussing ideas around how you change this narrative and create that sense of urgency as in the work that we're doing. So in order to kind of get a sense of where we all are in this and what brought you here, we have a little poll we wanted to start out with today, and I'm going to have Nell launch that poll for us. And if you just take a few minutes to answer that, and then we'll share all the answers with everybody. And there's 3 questions there, so you'll need to scroll down a little bit. So
Nancy,
yeah?
someone just asked, they said they couldn't see the poll anymore.
Yeah, Natalie, did you minimize it? Was there a way that you hit the minimize button somehow? Are other folks having that issue?
I just saw it back up. I clicked something else and it disappeared.
Yeah, I think it's like a separate window probably from your Zoom. So if you clicked away from it, it probably like went behind.
Yeah, I saw it back up for just a second, but I think somebody, oh, here we go. I found it.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool. Yep.
Okay, we'll give you another few seconds to finish that.
We're at about 80%.
Looks like a lot of people are curious, but most people want to build more diverse relationships. So that's great. And of course, everyone's busy. Storytelling is hard when everyone's busy. Okay, should we close out? Looks like we got 90% voted. I'm gonna go to the next slide.
All right.
But yeah, predominantly everyone is busy. I remember that for sure with communications. That's always hard to get to that. Okay. I'm gonna hand it over to Anupama now.
Thank you, Nancy. It's so nice to meet everybody, and it's great to be here. So as Nancy mentioned, the Blue Sky Funders Forum is a network of funders that have aligned values. Nancy, could you close the window? I guess I can close the window on my end, the poll window, if that is.
Yeah, I closed it, so I think you have to close it on your own. On your
I got
end,
it.
you know.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think, so Blue Sky has been sort of working on this shared narrative campaign, as Nancy mentioned, a group of funders that came together to identify that communications and lack of a unified message was really a need for the field, that it was sort of keeping the field from moving forward. And so as part of this long process of engagement with practitioners and funders from across the country, when we launched Rethink Outside last October, we, our research kind of showed that that there were stark differences in how communities were experiencing the benefits of outdoors, be it through outdoor preschools, through school-based environmental education programs, park access, green spaces, gardens, what have you. And that communities of color with limited access were, had limited access. And if they had access, that there were sort of safety issues or perceptions of safety issues that they were facing and they were feeling, that they felt that they did not belong as well. In this current moment that we are in, it's just, it's important to note that we are living in a time of multiple crises right now. And we have a public health crisis that has about more than 150,000 deaths in the US and 4 or 5 times more than that in across the globe. But we've also seen a huge upheaval in the country demanding racial justice, and there's a movement for Black Lives Matter. We're seeing a lot of different things happening in the country. We're all holding this with us, as we are thinking about our work and as we are thinking about what our work will look like in the future. And so as we sort of continue to think about our work and think about communications, I just wanted to ground us in this reality that we are in currently. And as we think about our work in the context of how schools and colleges will reopen in the fall, one thing is clear, that this crisis has certainly elevated the importance of time in nature, and that people are seeing the benefits of stepping out or looking at a green space or looking out of your window. For many people who didn't really value it before the crisis, they are starting to see the benefits of it. And that's, in some ways, the basis or the basic premise behind the Rethink Outside campaign is about how do we get this this sense of, nice to have, not so urgent, to a necessity. And this crisis has in some ways elevated that, or is magnifying the need for time outdoors for everybody, and certainly for, for communities of color. The challenge for us as a movement, I think, right now is to figure out how we can maintain this interest in public spaces and outdoors and nature, after all of this is over and whatever the new normal looks like. And so in some ways, this work is even more important now, because we really need we need the narrative, and we need the work, communications work, to happen so that we can continue to build on this interest that we're seeing right now in the current crises. So through Rethink Outside, what we are seeking to do, next slide please, Nancy. What we are seeking to do is exactly that. We are seeking to challenge the prevailing narrative around time spent in nature, and that we are wanting to lift up the benefits of time spent outdoors as a basic human right now and after this crisis is over as well. So it's really timely, and relevant, especially in the current situation that we are in. Next slide, please. When we launched the Rethink Outside campaign and call to action last October, we didn't realize that we were going to be facing a global pandemic, which is further highlighting the inequities of who's accessing the outdoors, but also how they're accessing it. And so the Rethink Outside goal of moving from a nice to have frame to a necessity frame for the outdoors is really coming alive in these challenging times that we are facing. And our work is even more relevant now. So for the last 4 months or 4 or 5 months, we've been, in our conversations, we've been hearing from practitioners that there have been a lot of questions about, how do we communicate the importance of the outdoors in this current context? What does crisis communications look like? Should we even be communicating? We want to make sure we're not getting things wrong. And so as part of the Rethink Outside campaign, we took it upon ourselves to create a messaging brief that was very much aligned with the Rethink Outside narrative and the values, but it was specific to the COVID-19 crisis that we were facing. And so we do have a Rethink Outside messaging brief that is available for you, which is built on the narrative values, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just wanted to make sure that you are aware that there's a specific messaging brief that touches on crisis communications and also touches on how you can use this narrative for the current context. You can certainly use it, beyond this context and this crisis as well. So Nell has, Nell has a link in the chat box that gives you a link to the messaging brief. All right, so let's dig in a little bit into what this narrative itself is. And the narrative is based on what you see here is a basic framework for a messaging architecture of the narrative. Right at the center, you've got the core messages of the narrative, which are related to everyone deserving the opportunity to enjoy time outdoors, when everybody has that access, that everybody benefits. And then secondly, we want to bring more people to have more meaningful experiences outdoors so that their quality of life and health and well-being improve. And as a result, we're building healthy communities that are stronger and more sustainable. So given this core message, we move a little bit further into value statements of the narrative. And if you see the light blue and the light green boxes that you see one step above the dark browns, are the 5 value statements of the narrative. And these are really related to tested statements that we tested with audiences across the environmental education field, but also tested across various groups of people that aligned more with health, education, social justice, and youth development, which were sort of target audiences that we wanted to make sure we were able to reach through this narrative. And so part of the goal of this narrative process and campaign is to bring in more partners and bring in more allies. And I saw in the poll that many of you said you wanted to use the narrative or use storytelling to bring in more partners. So this is perfectly exactly what the goal of the narrative is. So the value statements are, you can read, I'm not going to read them, but we'll sort of go into them a little bit. But these are framed around positive experiences outdoors, access to everyone, the respite from the stresses of modern life, very relevant right now in the current context, and youth development and opportunities for youth to learn and thrive in the outdoors, and then the health and well-being of people, again, extremely relevant in the current context as well. So once you have these value statements, and we'll give you an example of how you use these value statements to tell your story. You can back up these value statements with data and stories, and tell your stories using these value statements that then leads to the core message of the narrative. So let me give you an example of how we could do that. Nancy, next slide, please. So here's how you use values-based messaging. You kind of start with, it's a 4-step process, and it's a simplified process here for you. The first step in the process is to introduce the issue. So this is about, what's the problem, what's the opportunity. The second one is around the framing of the story, which is around, how do you, this is the place where you sort of select one of the values or the value statements that we just talked about. You frame the issue with one or more of the value statements, and there are 5 value statements, and we can share those with you as well. The third thing that you would do is, based on those value statements, and you think about the data and the stories that you can use to amplify the value statements. These are your reasons to believe the value statement, and these are the reasons that you're wanting to communicate to your audience as well. And the fourth and the last step is certainly extremely important, and many people don't do that, is to sort of close it out, and that is the call to action. So how is this story leading to a better world, or whatever the outcome that you're trying to get at. So this is the sort of very, very simplified messaging framework that is the core behind the narrative. And we want you to sort of use this for any kind of storytelling, but it's an important one to have. So let's give you an example of how this could be used specifically for your work. So let's see. So this is an example that we have from an organization, the Lawrence Hall of Science.
No, actually, Anupama, it's framed similar to that, but we did change it to. Okay. So it's not exactly.
All right. So I think what I will do then is we wanted to give you an example that was relevant to you. So I'm going to pass it on to Nancy to maybe go through this example that is more in the context of your state and the work that's happening there. So Nancy, passing it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Anupama. So yeah, Nell and I wrote this up to try to, and it was similar to one that was written up from Bales Hall of Science, which I think many of you are familiar with, and probably quite a few of you have participated in their training around the COVID pandemic, and something that we've kind of been talking a lot about. And so starting and introducing the issue is the recognition that the pandemic has actually threatened the survival of camp facilities and outdoor education programs here in Oregon, especially given that there's interactions with the K through 12 schools, and it's oftentimes dependent upon students being in school. So the frame we chose was the frame around young people learning in the outdoors, and how important that is for young people to have those opportunities. And then, trying to get specific, we narrowed it, or looked at, like, what do environmental education organizations bring to this? We've been hearing a lot of conversation about how there's less risk of contracting COVID-19 in the outdoors. We all know that it's easier to social distance in the outdoors, and we all know that that schools are having a difficult time getting kids back into the classroom. So the Be Specific is really about addressing those things that we know and that there's research around specifically. And then, how we might conclude would really depend a little bit upon your audience. So it could be that you're trying to message schools about the developing relationships to bring you in and help you get more students back onto campus. And, you know, so how you frame the conclusion really depends a lot upon the specific audience that you are trying to reach. But we have here that outdoor learning programs offer a solution to the challenges that schools are facing right now. And therefore, they should be prioritized in the partnership with schools. I think, you know, one thing I think we want to try to do in our conclusion language is to use strong language and make sure that there is a really clear call to action in that. So the outdoors is a resource for learning, engagement, health, and should be available to all. So that's an example. And we thought at this point, we might try to break out into some groups and give you about maybe 10 minutes. And I don't know exactly how many people we have on here.
Like 22 currently.
22, okay. So we're gonna break out into groups. It's gonna be 3 groups, so 6 or 7 people in a group, or 7 or 8, I guess, in a group. And maybe a couple people who kind of have an idea could share how they might use a framework like this. And we'll hopefully be in those groups to kind of help you along in that process.
And Nancy, at the very beginning, somebody named Janice Kelly mentioned that she wrote a feature story for a journal online about nature ed opportunities and referred to that. So I just want to call out Janice because I think maybe she might be a good resource for folks in a group as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's in the Community Works Institute Journal online. And I made special note to mention Blue Sky Funders and Rethink Outside and give links to your website and your narrative because it was a really important piece of emerging nature education opportunities now and in the future, because that's who you are. So thank you very much for the acknowledgement.
That's great. Okay, I am going to try to assign breakout rooms. I'm going to give you 10 minutes and it should notify you when the time is up. And it's going to do this sort of automatically, so let's hope this all works. Oops. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Huh, looks like the other rooms are not back yet. Let me.
Yeah, I think ours was actually doing the 1 minute countdown when we all, because
Oh,
the
sorry.
timer on top zeroed out, but then it came up that we had a minute left.
Oh, I couldn't see that. So, okay, thank you. That's
Yeah.
helpful. I'm like, wait, where'd everybody go?
So what I was going to say before I saw our timer was I would love to I have a workshop or something for classroom teachers. I did my master's in teaching also, and I was subbing last year, but teachers really, I feel like, perpetuate fear, and it's partially perpetuating the fear of field trips and having to facilitate and organize all that. I wonder if some workshops for teachers would help with the way they do storytelling and the way they storytell in their classrooms to make experiences like this more accessible.
That's great. Thank you, India. Good thought. Well, I think, do we have everybody back?
I think so. We're back.
Yep, I think maybe. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I hope you had some good conversations. I don't know, do people want to share out some of a little bit of what they talked about in their group? Be happy to have people unmute themselves if they want to share a little bit.
Leanne, do you want to do that from our group? This is Anupama's group. Or Leanne's group, actually.
Sure. So I had brought up the Oregon Environmental Literacy Plan and the program and how to build a story that would evoke participation in that plan and program. Anything else to add, group?
Okay, thanks, Leanne. Anybody else want to share a little bit? India or Teresa from the group I popped into? Okay, well, I'm not going to make anyone share. So, did I skip a slide? No. This is the next slide.
We're not seeing the slide yet, I don't think, in the screen.
Oh, you're not? Okay. I probably stopped sharing somehow. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, let me get that back in presentation mode.
Great, thanks, Nancy.
There we go.
Thank you, Nancy. So I mentioned that there's a messaging brief that's available, and the link was shared with you, which has a lot more information about communicating in a crisis. And this is just one thing that we've pulled out for you, as part of the messaging. This is part of the messaging brief. I think two things I wanted to mention that are also in the messaging brief. And they are around sort of picking your moments to respond to the crises and not taking advantage of it. So sort of keeping a frame of that response to the moment that we're in and not taking advantage of the situation, and driving attention to whatever you're asking for sort of action on based on your values, your organizational values, and the values framework that we shared with you. And then second, I think just using a common good frame, and in this slide you're sort of seeing where we're recommending you using words like we, us, our, thinking about person first language, keeping a wide lens on solutions, avoiding inciting fear. There's a lot of that in the media and already, and we don't need to add to that. And then lastly, not just, there's the value statements, you've got your stories and your data as well. And that is, important to plug back into your values, to support your values as you're telling your stories. So this is just, another another example of what is available in that messaging brief that we shared with you. And there's much more in that. So I just wanted to pick out a couple of things to share with you. Next slide, please. So how can you get engaged with Rethink Outside? You can do it, in a couple of different ways. We want you to make a pledge, and that just means that you're pledging to align with the narrative, that you believe in the frame of the narrative that the benefits of time spent outdoors is a basic human right, and we want you to use it. So you can use it through telling your stories. We have a story bank that's available. We have a story writer that we've been offering to organizations to tell their stories. And we have a couple of events that are happening, including some storytelling workshops and quarterly webinars that we're doing to share out how different organizations are using the narrative. So if you haven't attended any of them, I'd urge you to sign up for our listserv to get on our mailing list, and you'll get information about that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have about more than 16 stories on the Story Bank, Rethink Outside Story Bank, and there's more that are getting added onto it as well. And I wanted to see, Nancy, if you wanted to pick out one that stood out for you that is relevant for this audience, in, in the stories that we currently have available.
Yeah, I mean, going through the story bank is really fun because there are a lot of stories that are, really relevant and similar sort of organizations from across the country that are doing work that I think you'd find would be very aligned with the kind of work that you're doing. I think I admit I read through these last week and now I can't remember like the exact one or exact ones, but and there are several more besides this. I mean, I do remember the Youth Education Offers Healing and Hope to be a really compelling story, as well as Equity in Action. And, I would encourage you all to take a look at this because it also shows you how somebody who took some of that framework and kind of put it into action in writing a story. The other thing that I would share is that several people that have gone through this have really been, I think, surprised and about how it's enabled them to think about that messaging differently. And in our group, I think one of the compelling stories that somebody was talking about just in a big picture, when you think about a messaging framework, was talking about a company who, seventh generation, who many of you would know, and I should just hand it over to Teresa to tell that story. Because I thought, Teresa, would you be willing to repeat that to this group?
Sure. I am new to Oregon. I came from a college in Vermont, but I had the opportunity to work with a faculty member in business who was a marketing expert. And when she was first employed by Seventh Generation, the company was losing money and they had lost money for years. And their messaging was completely, buy these products because they're better for the environment. If you care about the environment, buy them. And all she suggested was that they changed the way they frame their message. And instead of saying it's good for the environment, she said the people that buy those cleaning products are stereotypically, the mother in the family, and the mothers care about their child's health. So without having to change the products, if we frame it as buy these because it's better for your child's health, which they did, all of a sudden the company was now making money. They were able to stay solvent. And so it was all in the framing without having to change the product. It was still good for the environment. They didn't change the product, but they changed the messaging to reach the audience and what the audience was prioritizing with their dollars.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's a great example that's really tangible about how, because sometimes you go into this and you think, well, I'm not going to change my mission, or I'm not going to change the work we're doing. And it really is not about that. It's really thinking about who are you trying to reach and what's the compelling story that is part of your narrative, a part of your work that is going to reach that audience. So I hope that's helpful. So we had I was hoping that Sprinna Brown from Camp Elsa would be able to join us today, but she wasn't. She was able to attend the Oakland workshop, which happened right before everything got shut down. So she was really one of the lucky people, or maybe not, because I think at that point it was a little bit scary to be traveling already in early March. But, I had a chance to talk to her after it, and this is exactly sort of the feedback that she gave us as well. It was exciting to be able to think in a different way about work. And I think to have that opportunity to really sit down and focus, one of the polls, everybody said, or many people said, it's hard to find that time to think about storytelling and to think about this work. And it is a hard thing for us to prioritize. And hopefully what this messaging architecture and framework helps us do is to give us that path to sit down and kind of start planning all of that out. And the workshops have been really great from that process as well. So hand it to Anupama to talk about the
Yeah,
workshop.
so thanks, Nancy. So we're doing a series of additional workshops. They'll be virtual now, and they're coming up in October. The dates are here for you. The registrations are open. Registration is open right now. And these workshops are going to cover things like the value-based storytelling and framework that I quickly went over with you, in more detail. These are four sessions of 1.5 hours each on these 4 days. It'll also cover communications during, crises in general, and then in the current crisis that we are in, COVID-19 and other, racial unrest as well. It is going to cover and look at, help you identify your audiences. It's going to look at your potential story structure. It's going to look at your sort of, approach to storytelling as well. And then at the end of it, you will eventually be like, have a framework for your story, or have an almost ready story at the end of the four sessions. So that's our goal, and encourage you to consider it in building your own capacity to tell a compelling story that brings in more allies and partners.
Yeah, and we, there is a cost to attending these, but we also know that this is a really valuable skill for our grantees and for the people working in this field to develop. And so we're hoping to be able to help support some organizations and individuals to attend this workshop. So if you're interested, and we really encourage you to take a look at the Rethink Outside website and the tools that are there. And if it's something that you feel like would make sense for you or your organization, or somebody in the organization to attend after reviewing all of that, to reach out to, probably Nell's the best person to contact at the foundation to talk about what that might look like. We definitely want a commitment for, I think the one of the pieces of feedback that Anupama not only heard from Sabrina, who could attend, but from others, was that they wished it had more time over multiple days, and the virtual thing is really enabling us to do that. But it means that there has to be a strong commitment to attend, I think, all 4 days, and be a part of all of that to really make it work. And in some ways, I think the virtual is ideal because there is that time break up in between the days to work on your own communication stuff and come back and get the feedback that's really helpful part of these workshops. So, so we want to make sure that there's time if there's other questions or things that have come up, or anything else, any comments or anything anyone wants to add.
One thing I just wanted to mention and highlight, Nancy, was for the audience, was that we have an open source Google Doc that's available where you can share your story. So, and Janice, I encourage you and others that have written or are in the process of writing your stories, you can share how you're using the narrative, and then in the same Google Doc, you can also see how others are using. So it's a generated by the community type of Google Docs. You'll see lots of different examples of how people are using the narrative, and we'd love to hear from you as how you're using it too.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay. Let me move to the final slide. So any questions or comments or anything? And feel free to unmute yourself or put something in the chat, however you're comfortable. And if you're all too tired out for that at this point in the day, I understand too. And I just want to say thank you. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found this useful, because that's the goal. The goal is to help create this for all of you guys doing work out there in the field. So, Anupama or Nell, you have anything final to add?
Just want to say thank you, and I encourage you to check out the stories that are already on the site, because I think sometimes seeing something like a message framework for the first time, it helps to kind of see it put into action, and there's lots of really exciting stories from all across the country on there, so we would check that out. But thank you all for being here. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Again, if there's additional questions that come up as you're thinking through this, you can email me or you can email the Rethink Outside email and we'll respond promptly.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the week.
Bye, thank you.